Welcome to Securely Speaking, a podcast where we explore the realms of governance, identity, security, and compliance. I'm Moritz, the head of marketing at Integralis, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to our very first podcast. Drawing from our extensive experiences and fueled by our unwavering passion, we aim to change the way you perceive and approach identity. So, get ready to embark on a new journey with us. Let's dive in with Quinton Hughes, Almero Steyn, and Gillian Manojlovic as they unpack the question, what does project success look like?
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Securely Speaking. This is our very first podcast, something we've been planning for quite a while to get together, putting some time aside to talk to you guys about different IGA topics, identity, governance, and administration, compliance. The topic this week is Securely Speaking around IGA project success. But before we jump into the topic and some of the questions, let me just introduce myself and get my colleagues to introduce them. My name is Quinton Hughes. I've been working in the IGA industry since 2007.
Since you had hair.
Since I had hair, yes, exactly. I've learned quite a lot. We've done things wrong. We've done things right. We've done quite a few projects with large institutions and small businesses as well. We've worked across various different product platforms as well. So we've got quite a bit of knowledge and real life experience that I think it's just worth for us to share. We chose the podcast medium because who likes to read anymore? Everybody likes to listen or at least look at people when they talk. So that's me, and I'll be sharing some of my experiences through the course of this journey with you guys. Al, you want to jump in there?
So I horribly interjected you already, so let me just kind of introduce myself as well. Hello, I'm Almero Steyn. I've been working with Quinton on IGA projects since he had hair, literally. I think I remember that. I think it's tough to admit sometimes how long we've been doing this. So I started working in identity and access management, identity and access governance with the start of Microsoft's old MIS 2003. So I'm sitting on 20 years building synchronization engines and working on synchronization projects and governance projects. Time flew past quite quickly. So as Quinton mentioned, I think over the years, we've done a few intricate projects for a bunch of small customers with technical requirements or big multinational with big governance or security or legislative requirements. And the idea of this conversation is just to get some of that out for our own internal teams, for our customers, for anybody who's interested in the field. So today we're also joined by Gillian. Gillian joined us a while ago, actually from the customer side. We did a project together where Gillian was one of the key stakeholders from our HR perspective, trying to interface all the processes inside this customer site with the new IGA processes that had to go and drive things like onboarding, offboarding, governance scenarios, and things like that. But Gillian is interesting in that she's had an interesting career, kind of even pre-HR, with all kinds of interesting, I don't know how you want to summarize it, Gillian, probably like orchestration of projects or of processes has kind of been a key theme in a lot of the stuff that you've done. Gillian worked on the 2010 World Cup, where she facilitated all the teams and kind of all the weird requests that people want with, slightly cool and hot water with only sunflowers on a Wednesday facing east. So Gillian's been kind of on both sides of both the customer side, but also kind of the supplier side of a vendor trying to, adhere to kind of or try to satisfy some of these requirements. So it was interesting when we joined a project together where we quickly picked up that Gillian understood the business side, but kind of very quickly understood the kind of the limitations and the opportunity inside some of the IGA processes that you have. She kind of helped us successfully deliver that from the customer side, and then subsequently joined us and first worked in our business analysis division and kind of helped us work with other customers and kind of replicate some of the learnings that we had, and then actually moved on to now take over our IGA practice completely. So she runs all the technical guys and tries to orchestrate them to get all the projects delivered these days. So we're happy that Gillian's joining us in the conversation today. So I kind of introduced you completely, Gillian. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about yourself.
There's nothing left.
Thank you. You did an excellent job. Thank you for that. I think just to say, I've had a bit of an eclectic background, but certainly my time over a decade within the HR space and now 6 years within the IGA space, I think it really helps me to understand some of the pain points for business and where they have challenges understanding kind of this monster that can be identity governance. It's not really something that sits just in one space, right? So it's for me, it's a fascinating space, and I've been delighted with the journey so far.
Awesome, thanks, guys. So while we're on that topic, Gillian, let's just move on straight into the meat of this conversation. We did the project together when you were still a customer. We had some challenges there, to say the least. What would you say is one of the first things that you would have a discussion with a customer about when they engage or start this IGA journey to ensure success of that project, really?
Yeah, I think your internal stakeholders, making sure they're on board, knowing who they are, understanding that it isn't just an IT project or it isn't just a governance project, and that it really is a journey that requires all those stakeholders' engagement. It is so critical to determine ultimate success. So, not wearing the technical hat of the challenges there, I would certainly say that kind of stakeholder engagement and change management really is the thing that can make or break it.
Yeah, I think, we've seen that in the past. To me, it's really about defining the stakeholders, not just for the project, but defining the stakeholders that will own the service moving forward, or even before the project starts, really. We've seen that businesses struggle to find a position or find a place for an IGA service. They've never had this before. They've had components of it, operationally, automation, put a bit of tools in place, and they've got some compliance components in place, manually audit, internal audits, and things like that. But there hasn't been a service really that's defined as part of within the IT landscape or in the business landscape. This one sits right across both, and corporates struggle to find an owner. Not recently, but with the CISO role coming into play now and having a lot more attention and priority, getting a lot more priority in business, people usually just throw this within his space. But if that person comes from a compliance background or an audit background, that part of the project will get a lot of attention. If that person comes from an IT operations background, that part of the project gets a lot of attention. So it's really, when you say stakeholders, it's not just the stakeholders in the project, I think. That's really critical. It's also who will own the service within the company moving forward, right? If you can get that people on board, that really does help a lot. With companies where we've seen that happen, it's really helped us get the project successfully delivered and take it on into business.
I think it's interesting, Quinton. The amount of times we have the conversation with large customers, it's typically large corporate customers where there is kind of demarcation between some of the different functions inside the business. The amount of times we have a conversation where somebody goes, we know we need this. We have all they kind of been sold on all the benefits of having a program and technology platforms like this, but they have no idea who should actually own it. And there is both kind of a fight to own it themselves. So the governance guys want to own it, the security guys want to own it, whatever. But there's also this kind of thing of understanding that it's so big that they actually don't want to own it. They're like, no, we really think the security guys should own this. And no, the governance guys are like, no, I think a help desk should own this. So anytime we have a project, it's kind of interesting to understand where the project requirement originates. As soon as it's an audit finding, then typically that kind of is the horse that's going to drive the cart. If it is a technical thing, then, it's kind of automation first. Nobody cares about security and governance. We just got to get this in. And then it's a fairly tactical thing most of the time. But kind of if you look at a spectrum on how much this will interface with business, you kind of almost have to linearly go up the food chain about who's going to sponsor the project. So if it's a simple little tactical project, then you can get IT, we can deploy it, the help desk can run it. Okay, and as soon as you go, no, it's a IT project with a platform that's going to push control out to people inside the business, and managers are going to approve access, and they're going to do attestation surveys and stuff like this. Suddenly you jump all the way to the spectrum of it almost has to be a board exec kind of mandate that this is the direction we're going to go as a company. And if you fall somewhere in the middle, then you have this confusion where somebody goes, we don't exactly know where it's going to happen. So I think you're kind of spot on in the first point with understanding just what the requirement is, where it is, and kind of trying to define even before you pick a tool, because somebody sees a tool and then they're like, oh, we want this shiny thing. Trying to understand who's going to run with it and get those people on board early in the conversations about requirements and supportability and all these kind of things, I think is critical, because this system just does everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then
and also to know, sorry, Quinton, but it's also just on that, it's also going to be different from one organization to another, right? There isn't a recipe that says this is who your stakeholders are, and like it's only limited to every organization is going to bring their own flavor to it, right? And in terms of their own resourcing and structure.
Definitely, I agree. So I mean, we're saying it's a journey. It's not just a project, and it's becoming a new service. So your stakeholder planning should involve the owners of the new service and the drivers of the project, really, right? And adding on to that, I mean, if we look at how complex these projects get very, very quickly, you need good technical people involved. So really, it's companies where we have tried to do everything in one go. It's really been a struggle. It's too much for anybody to consume and really deliver, even the new owners of the service. So I think, looking at properly phasing projects into smaller chunks that you can change, manage easier, assign different owners of different parts of these services, phasing that a project approach to make it a long-term journey almost. That's definitely something that we've seen work well on IGA projects in the past as well.
A big bang approach it's too overwhelming for end users as well as for the project team.
Definitely.
Exactly.
So I think if you want to summarize, I'm hearing I've got a lot of good points here, and I'm kind of like a pragmatic thinker here, and I'm trying to understand how the conversation gives value to somebody listening to it at the moment. And I think what I'm hearing is something that you touched on, Quinton, is I think the first thing that I would say is expectation. A lot of times people have an expectation that an IGA deployment is another tool that you put in and it sits in a cupboard and it does something. I think if somebody embarks on an IGA deployment, they should have an expectation that this is a new platform that's put in place, but a new service that's created that will have a program associated to it. It's not going to be deploy and forget. It's going to be something that's actively managed by the business. So I think you have to understand that when you go into one of these projects, it only gives you this value if you drive it as a program like this. I think the second thing that we said already is that it's really good to get the right stakeholders for that involved and to kind of define what that is up front. And then thirdly, I think we see the customer names in our heads when we kind of go through this conversation, but kind of big bang monolithic projects don't really work well in this, because I think customers don't understand what they need at the start of this. They have maybe one audit finding or an efficiency requirement, but it's not a question of they have the whole program mapped out in their head. You maybe have 1 or 1.5 or maybe 2 phases kind of mapped up. So having a platform instantiation, kind of a base set of services and features and kind of stuff that gets online, and then have some kind of approach that matches your requirement, whether that's deploying more systems to get reach or going deeper into certain systems to get more governance in a certain function, whether it's finance or something like that. I think kind of like off the top of the conversation, I'm kind of hearing those 3 things straight up. Is there something else that we're missing?
No, I think there's quite a few. I mean, but I mean, out of if you look at all the artifacts available, material, there's lots of frameworks and project governance frameworks that will help you make a huge success of this. I think we've touched on quite a few that we've seen makes a huge difference. I mean, proper planning, right resources, handling continuous improvement, all those type of things are part of proper project governance in any case. So I don't really want to dig too much into that space. But what I do think, and this is probably coming into the second point now, is you said about understanding your business objectives and scoping the project well, not taking on too much. And that leads us on into the next discussion, and it's really understanding why you're doing this project. It'll help you drive the success. We touched on it earlier in terms of operations, or there's an audit finding, and really the project should focus on understanding these business objectives and then prioritizing those so that we can phase them and implement those priorities first. That will lead us back to proper expectation management. So, a lot of these projects run for more than a year, which means you'll probably have the same audit finding next year. But in the CIO's mind, that audit finding is resolved because he's got an IGA project running. So those type of factors come into play when you do these big projects. People have an expectation that the tool and the service will solve all your problems and the next audit finding will be smooth sailing. And it probably won't just yet. We'll get there. It's a journey. And understanding the objectives and the priorities of the sponsors and the people on the project and the business that you're doing the project for becomes critical in the success of a project like this. Gillian, you want to add on to that, because you've been on the other side and you've been
that's what I was wondering, yeah.
The HR person who was left in the dark as part of this project, right? You came on board halfway through the project, and I think you've probably got hands-on experience to what I'm saying at the moment.
Yeah, and I think, just on HR, HR has to be your strategic partner in this, not just an internal stakeholder, right? Because they are the owners and your authoritative source of employee data. So, if you aren't properly partnered up with HR from the start on a project, you are forever going to have problems in terms of identity governance and managing identities.
So I want to interject here quickly, Gillian. That's an interesting question now. So if I had to convince HR that this is in their best interest or this is beneficial to them, because I think what often happens is we work on the technical side and then somebody as a stakeholder kind of goes, oh, we'll get HR in line, and then there's there's a bit of an exec fight somewhere, and then somebody comes back and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to help you. And then kind of stuff kind of begrudgingly happens. So I'm kind of wondering, I never thought about it from an HR perspective, but kind of why does this matter for HR? I mean, because honestly, HR cares about the data and the processes that HR cares about. I don't often kind of get the idea that HR cares about downstream processes as much. I might be shot by an HR exec or a professional somewhere, but kind of like you're kind of have been on both sides now. How do I approach an HR function or team or whatever and sell the benefit of doing this?
I think if you're having to sell it, and maybe I get myself into trouble here, but I think if you're having to sell it to HR, it's because they are more transactional and less strategic in their delivery to business, right? So if HR doesn't view themselves as a strategic partner to business enablement, then they're not going to be interested on how a new starter gets set up and their permissions and access and governance and compliance. Then it's just, well, we're going to do our processes and you can slot in as and when you want, right? So we already know which customers, we can see this issue with. But where HR is tasked as a strategic partner, in some companies, they actually hold the matrix, what you want to transfer into a system. They hold those job profiles and what those job profiles are allowed to have, or what permissions those accounts should have, or what accounts they should have. And they hold that and take ownership of that. And that's where they'll kind of transition into a more strategic business partnership versus just a transactional back-end department. So if you're having to sell it, that's probably why. And that is, once again, I think also, they're not just an internal stakeholder. They really are a strategic partner towards a successful implementation.
Yeah, HR has always been a bit separate from the IT guys, right? The IT world, and I think that's changing. It has changed. We can already see that in a few customers, but it is changing quickly for the better with the advent of POPI and GDPR legislation and so forth. HR actually owns the private information. In theory, they should actually dictate and be accountable for who can see and consume that information, even from an IT systems integration perspective, really. And getting them involved early on in a project like this, telling them that they have got the keys to the kingdom and we only need access to some of that information to make this project a success, that our transactions will be dependent on their transactions, and anything they change will change this site, and there's a huge automation engine behind it. It'll get them interested and working with you rather than against you, like you said, Al. Instead of being instructed to go and work with these guys on a project, you really want to get involved. And the project that we did with Gillian, it changed overnight as soon as she got involved and she could see the potential of what was possible. It really changed.
I think it's actually an interesting point. I'm kind of like having an epiphany kind of while we're talking, going, why aren't we doing more to convince customers to get HR online as a strategic project from the start? I think the kind of like a takeaway from me for this conversation is we should be doing more when we go into these IGA deployments to ensure that at the sponsorship level, HR is really on board. Because if I look back at many of the deployments we've done, it happens, but it kind of happens in an operational fashion. We need this data, and after the seventh request, now somebody in HR says, okay, we have enough bandwidth to help you. And I think it's probably just a symptom of the sponsorship executives or the managers in the departments aren't aligned in timing, because oftentimes we get the message, no, HR is too busy at the moment. We're busy with this SAP rollout or this thing or this employee transfer. We can't align to your requirement at this stage. But then eventually, halfway through the project, you realize you can't deliver this project if you don't do it with HR. So I think that's a big thing.
Also, that to me speaks back to what you pointed out earlier about it going all the way up to the executive level, right? The project sponsorship really has to come from an executive level and be driven down. If it's literally just originating from an IT manager perspective, to have to get that buy-in at an executive level to then filter it down, that adds complexity, right? So you want the board to be engaged. You want the executives and C-suite level to be engaged, to be going, this is a strategic project for our company, and filter it down into those HR, IT, governance, audit. This will be the journey you come on, and you are accountable, HR, as the owners of employee data.
Yeah, and looking back at the projects, I can see the ones where that happened, where they are a success and they're adopted, and you have support function, you have training, you have change happening. And I see big multinationals where the platform is basically a glorified sync engine. So I can kind of see that, kind of looking back at many of the deployments that we've done, that's spot on.
Yeah, this notion of ownership of the product or the service or the platform moving forward really hits home. Every topic we discuss, we keep going back to the owners. Who's going to own this? Who's going to drive this? Executive sponsorship. So literally all the projects that we've been involved with that were huge successes were because of the business and the corporate and the executives taking ownership. So yeah.
And ironically, it had nothing to do with the platform.
Exactly. Nothing to do with the technology or the project team, really. It's just, and I think if you bring executive ownership into a project, that allows the project to adapt quickly to how the business changes as well, because executives understand the impact of changes in business and strategy on these projects that might be running for more than a year or two, and if you don't have that sponsorship, you don't have that ownership, you don't often see or get pulled into those strategic changes. You only have to adapt after the fact. So part of your project is that your project plan will probably never be the same project plan as you start with and what you end with. You need to be able to adapt quickly, and adapting to business strategy changes and how business evolves. And that can only happen successfully, again, if you bring it back to ownership and executive buy-in.
I think this has been a really good conversation. I can already see that there's definitely a few points here that make sense for a lot of the internal consultants with us, as well as conversations with some of our customers. So I think what we'll do from our perspective is maybe put a few of these points in our show notes and just make sure that they end up in the description of the show so that people can download them and kind of review them and just kind of see if they can identify some of these patterns or some of these challenges in their own organizations before they're trying to embark on it or try to solve a problem that's currently already there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think, definitely we'll do that so that people can not only listen to us, but they can go and steal some of the notes afterwards. We won't charge you for that. That's for Mahala. There's one more topic that I want to touch on quickly in terms of IGA success, and I think this has helped me more than anything on any of the projects that we've delivered in the IGA space, and that's the idea and notion of utilizing a IGA framework as part of your project delivery mechanisms, as part of your analysis that you have to do, as part of your phasing the project into smaller chunks. That framework really makes a huge difference, right? Gillian, you were introduced to that framework a few years ago. What did you think of that, of an IGA framework like that?
Well, I think what's helpful is it helps to break it up, right, in bite-sized, manageable chunks, and almost theme the topics of identity lifecycle management, access management, business alignment, building policies and roles, and it also kind of speaks to the incremental implementation that we spoke about, not going big bang. You can't implement big bang and go from 0 to fully governed in the space of 2 months, 3 months. Yeah. It really is the journey. And having a framework where you can engage with business and with the stakeholders and go, okay, we're going to unpack identity governance and identity lifecycle management. Let's look at all your employees. What does your joiner, mover, leaver process look like? How should it look? What does it look like for contractors? How do you want to design it for contractors? And how will the system deliver that to you? I think that a framework for people like yourselves, and even for myself, we've been working in this space, you guys for decades. It kind of is almost second nature for you. But when you're trying to engage with people who haven't had to give much thought to this before and don't necessarily see the big picture, everybody sees their little component. It's a good way to bring everybody onto the same page and show them the bigger picture that, it's not just about service desk provisioning and deprovisioning accounts, and it's not just about a system administrator creating access and revoking access, right? There's a bigger picture, and that framework definitely helps give it.
Yeah, a big part of the success of a project like this is understanding what you have today, really. You need to understand what your current challenges, your current processes are and how they work. And if you just start asking people questions left, right, and center within the IGA domain, they will get lost. So the framework does allow you, and has allowed us really, to systematically extract information about current, focusing on an onboard process for an employee or an onboard process for a contractor, simple things like that, and just systematically talking through people, showing them the framework, helping them make sense of this huge project that we are delivering, right? That has helped a lot. So in terms of that, the framework is really, and we'll put a link to our framework in the notes as well, and you guys can read up on that and see it.
And the framework, as a visual representation, helps to bring people back to where they're sitting in the discussion, where we're at and how it slots in to everything else, right? How does building a policy or a context tie back into identity, lifecycle management, and so yeah. And
even utilizing the framework. We've had a project where, and Gillian, you were part of this, so you can probably comment on this as well. if you go into a customer and you say, tell me a bit about your onboarding process of an employee, they go, yeah, it's all very well documented. Here's a big fat document. Go away and read it. Don't bother our people. And then once you understand what it looks like, then we can discuss what we want it to look like.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've quickly realized is that if you don't speak to the people who work on the floor, who work in the process,
in the
trenches, right? They will give you the actual information, not the pie in the sky documented version of what it should look like. They will tell you what they are actually doing. And that really brings home the challenges that we identify in these projects. And sometimes even it requires a bit of a scope change because people think it worked this way and now suddenly they realize that it's working a different way. And the framework helps you to isolate and ask the right questions to the right people. But it is key that even if you use a good framework and you use good project methodology, you need to speak to people in this project, right? You can't just go on what was delivered 5 years ago as a big project by a big audit firm that says, this is your process today. You can't work on documentation alone. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think, quite often documentation is almost your wish list of how the process should run. But the moment you start talking to people, they go, yeah, but actually 90% of the time, it's actually no longer like that. So yeah, but we have all these other exceptions that happen, right? So those are the things you need to understand and unpack.
And going with that, the good old cliche of don't assume, right?
Yes,
Inspect,
absolutely.
Don't expect, inspect, and don't assume. Those old cliches ring very true in the IGA project. We've assumed that people don't share passwords in clear text when an account's created. We've assumed that, and we were wrong. We've assumed things like people don't send copies of their IDs via email and phone and WhatsApp, and yet they do. So don't assume, investigate, and inspect.
And I think also what's interesting for me, in doing these workshops and actually having, HR and service desk and IT security, like everybody around the table, is quite often people only know and understand the current processes from their perspectives, and they actually don't know what the other people are doing.
Yep.
So quite often you end up with like, oh, wow, I didn't know that that's what we do. Oh, I didn't realize that didn't or does happen, right? So it's people don't even understand how the current processes are working within their organization from start to end. And now you're asking them, well, give us how you want it to be designed. How can they understand the to-be state if they don't even understand what it looks like today? So it's important to understand where you're at, what it's really looking like, so you can build for the future.
I think the difficult part, I think, kind of like closing comment here is it's not a sales thing. It's just a reality that I think we've realized is that having a business analyst look at a process helps a lot. Okay, anybody would say that's true. So that customers typically have internal BAs look at processes, document them. The challenge is that having a IGA focused business analyst look at a process sometimes gives a perspective that's broader than just the individual component, or takes into account stuff that comes from regulatory or legal or efficiency or security or POPI or whatever requirements, as well as what can physically be done in the tools these days. I think that's kind of, we've worked with customers in the past where they have business analysis that's been given to us and it's very valuable. But then we find that there's a disconnect between the picture that they have in their mind versus what's physically possible in reality or in process. And sometimes that gap is really bridged well when you have somebody external or somebody with an IGA perspective come in and do the business analysis focused piece, or kind of revise it or work with the customer in conjunction. I think that's the key that I've seen with your work, Gillian.
I mean, I experienced that this past week where, the question was posed to a new customer to say, well, offboarding, how soon, if somebody is terminated in HR or is terminated, how long does it take for them to be terminated on the system? And it's immediate. And I immediately went, I don't believe that for a second. Because, if it's the HR payroll system, there'll be a payroll close period, so that's not
The
possible.
15th,
So these-
maybe.
Yeah, so I kind of need to let's have a look at this. Is this really the case? And if it was somebody who doesn't have that background and understanding in terms of identity lifecycle management and has worked with HR platforms before, they would just accept that. Oh, okay, it happens immediately. But I immediately know that there's a HR system limitation potentially at play that would negate that as a reality. So.
And I mean, I think this is probably another valid point for successful project delivery is getting the right expertise on the project. If you involve people with an HR background, good business analysis background, you give them the IGA frameworks, you've got all the right people on board in your project, from the project sponsor to the executive sponsors, you get the right technical people together, then you've got all the components at least to deliver a project successfully. Then it's all down to planning and managing that expectation back to business. We're going to do this in small chunks. We're going to start slowly. We're going to deliver value after value in smaller chunks, rather than saying we're going to run for a year, a dark pit, and then after a year we'll give you a tool and walk away type thing. So definitely, yeah. Right, guys, I think we're almost out of time. I think we can probably cover another hour on this topic. We haven't even touched on data quality or training and anything like that, but maybe those are separate topics that we can discuss at a later stage. I think maybe to summarize, Al, I think we said executive sponsorship is very important, right? We said we need the right stakeholders, and these people need to be involved from the beginning. We need to get HR involved and make them champions within this project, definitely. Get the right expertise onto your project. Utilize a good framework. Frameworks help you drive the process. It helps understand, this house should have windows at least, because that's the framework. There's some legislation and governance compliance that needs to be adhered to. How many windows and what they should look like, Mr. Customer, you tell us. We'll go and design it for you within this framework. And the framework helps give that structure and also allow you to measure the success then, right? You've delivered certain components in that framework. Anything you guys want to add before we say ciao on our first?
No, I think that was a good summary.
Securely speaking. Well, thanks for joining, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Gillian. Thanks, Al. I really appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts and experience on this topic.
It's a good conversation. Hopefully it's valuable to somebody. I like it.
Give us feedback if you can,
guys.
and maybe let us know what you think. Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, leave a like and subscribe to stay tuned for our upcoming sessions. We'd also love to hear from you, so leave a comment in the comment section, or alternatively, reach out to us on www.integralis.coza/contact us. See you next time.